Okay. Testing. Oh, okay. It's good. The green light isn't on. So welcome, everyone. I would like to call this November 23rd meeting of the City Council of Charleston to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Shealy.
Here.
Councilmember Saccharin. Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Councilmember Brady.
Present.
Councilmember Gregory. Councilmember Waring. Councilmember Seekings. Councilmember Shade. Councilmember Griffin. Councilmember Appel. Councilmember Jackson. Mayor Tecklenburg.
Here, and let the record show that Councilmember Saccharin is with us online virtually, and by our current rules that is allowed. So if you'd like to join us, Councilmember Appel will lead us in an invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sure. And I am not going to do a moment of silence here. I've actually prepared for this prayer. I found a Jewish prayer for political leadership of all things. God of history, we yearn for new leadership, for men and women of inspiration and insight, visionaries to build nations and communities in your image, stewards dedicated to justice, unafraid to face the challenges of our day, so that our cities and countries resonate with compassion and health, justice and mercy, kindness and peace. Bless our leaders with dedication and foresight, fortitude and imagination to solve the complex issues that threaten our future. May they lead us to a time when neighbors embrace and the communities thrive, a time when liberty and equality reign supreme. Source and shelter grant safety and security to all nations and communities, so that truth and harmony will resound from the four corners of the earth. Let the light of wisdom shine brightly in the halls of power, a beacon of hope for every land and every people. Thank you.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you, Councilmember. That was terrific. And unbelievably, we have no special presentations or recognitions this evening, but I would like to, I guess, make two announcements. One is due to the Jewish calendar, the way it aligns this year, we're opening our holiday season just past Thanksgiving with Hanukkah in the square. So I invite all of our council members and everyone listening. It'll be a fantastic time this coming Sunday in Marion Square at 4 o'clock, 4 to 6. There'll be food, free food, music. We're going to light the menorah and tell the story of the Maccabees. And it's a wonderful inspiration of light and love for the holiday season this Sunday, 4 o'clock, Marion Square. So the other thing I just wanted, rather than save it to the end, I wanted to wish everyone on council and listening again a happy Thanksgiving. I really think, even though there have been challenges the last couple of years, we really have so much in Charleston to be thankful for, so many blessings, and I wish y'all and your families the happiest Thanksgiving and a little break, a little time off this weekend. So enjoy that. So next up is our public hearings. We have a few of those, and Christopher Morgan, as usual, is going to lead us on those. Christopher?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I need to adjust this. Are you all able to hear me if I speak like this? Okay, then it's working. Okay, great. I've got a PowerPoint that's going to come up here. There we go. All right, so rezoning E1. So this is on Spring Street, 200 Spring Street. This is also together with rezoning E2. This is a tract on Spring that the request is to go from 5-story Old City Height District to a 6-story Old City Height District, and it's in the area that is outlined in the outlined in the crosshatch on the images before you and in your packages. And then also adjacent to that is rezoning E2 at 210 Spring Street. Again, a similar request from 5-story to 6-story Old City Height District for the bulk of the property. And then in the back corner, crosshatched also requested, to go from 2.5-story to 3-story Old City Height District. I think they're going to pull the slideshow back up here.
I think IT is trying to share their screen.
Okay. There we go. So that's E1 and E2. And we just have some images of these. It shows where they show in the in our new city plan. They are in the neighborhood designation there. They show the aerial images of the property. They're used for parking at present. And some images that show you the neighborhood to the rear and some of the other uses across the street. And just a view from the street, new buildings going in there. That building is now topped out that you see under construction there. And looking down Spring Street going towards the West Ashley area. And Planning Commission has reviewed both of these, E1 and 2, and recommended unanimously for their approval.
All right. Would anyone from the public like to be heard on numbers 1 or 2? Please come forward. Yes, sir. We're taking 1 and 2 together.
And Mr. Mayor, what's the time limit?
Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Anthony G. Bryant. My address is based upon the Internal Revenue Service received October 27th, 2021, before your meeting on October 26th. The issue before what I'm bringing forward, I was under the comprehensive plan in 1994, and the issue of growth. Also, the First Amendment ordinance that you have, that this is police power, okay? Zoning is police power. So all the zonings that you do, you should fully disclose and give notice to every citizen what the First Amendment Act ordinance is, 1. 2, how can you have an order planning and zoning issues before the budget? It's $2 million of deficit that you have. You're going to be taxing these folks and other folks that's come behind you for their money. So at $2 million, you're in the hole. You told the Army Corps of Engineers that you got the money to leverage for the flooding. The flooding shouldn't be an issue in turn. This affects growth. Under the Planning and Enabling Act, it's growth. So under growth, this particular applicant and all applicants are being affected by flooding and other things because of the mayor's, I guess, error in terms of how much money he's got to affect changing flooding with matching dollars or whatever he talked to the Army Corps of Engineers about. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to be heard? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Mayor. Jeff Roberts, address is on Broad Street in Charleston. We appreciate our 2 properties getting heard in front of council. It's fully supported by the neighborhood, as we have done things for many, many years in this neighborhood and help beautify it and craft the urban edge. So if anybody on council has any questions on this request, I'm here to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to be heard? So number 1 and 2 will come to council.
Move for approval. Second.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Now for third reading,
Second.
numbers 1 and 2. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Morgan.
Okay. Rezoning E3 is on Clements Ferry Road, TMS 275-00000005. It's about an 1.5 acre portion of the tract that's there. It's a request to go from rural residential RR1 to conservation. There's an interest in putting a marina on the property that would be on the water, of course, area, waterborne portion of the property. And our ordinance allows for marinas in conservation zoning districts. The conservation zoning is actually a little bit of a down zone in this instance because it only allows 1 unit every 1.5 acres, whereas the RR1 is 3.5 units an acre. So the conservation request would be in line with our new city plan that shows this area as what we call our low impact and conserved area. So the water-based the land-based portions of the marina would be appropriate in that location and in line with what the new city plan says. We have a couple of images that show you the site. It's currently undeveloped, wooded tract. There you can see the portion of the tract, 1.5 acres, and it was recommended for approval by Planning Commission with a 6-0 vote.
Would anyone from the public like to be heard on this matter? Yes, sir.
Russ Seaman with Seaman Whiteside, 501 Wando Park Boulevard. We're the applicant, here to answer any questions if you have them. I do want to reiterate that this is in line with the old comprehensive plan and the new city plan, and it is a down zoning, and request your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Second.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Any questions, Councilmember Seekings? Okay. So just curious, Mr. Morgan, the current zoning of the RR1, would that also allow for the marina?
It would allow for a marina that is just for the use of those residents, the individual lots there, but
Right.
it wouldn't allow for a marina that might have other users from outside the neighborhood.
I see. Okay. Gotcha. Any other questions?
I'm just confused by, so the current zoning allows for a marina to be constructed to be used by a limited group of folks, but this is going to expand it to a public marina?
Correct. And so the city doesn't get into the permitting of the actual marina itself. It's just the other associated activities with the marina, like if there is a marina office or store or something like that. Those types of associated activities would be allowed. They would not be allowed in like an RR1 area. The parking for the marina, for example, that needs to be on the conservation zone property. It wouldn't be allowed in the RR1. That would have to come from within the neighborhood if you were just doing it for the neighborhood itself.
Could I ask the applicant just how, have y'all gotten approval yet from DHEC to build a marina and what size it is?
Yes, sir. We do have the approval from DHEC for the marina, and it's a 110 slip marina.
110 slips?
Yes, sir.
And so it would be open to the public?
It could potentially be open to the public. Yes, sir. I think the idea is to have someone who runs a marina come in and, so we don't know all the answers at this
Right.
point.
All right. Council, any other questions, comments? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right. So next up, Mr. Morgan, number 4.
E4 is at 228 President Street, TMS 460070137. It's about a half-acre tract. It is behind a number of existing single-family houses. It is a site that had a former kind of multifamily building at grade level. The image here shows the site, which is on the upper end of President Street up near Burke High School. It is at present vacant. I think we've got some images that show it. In our city plan, it's part of the neighborhood area, which is in line with what the west side is at present. And here's an aerial image of the site, again, vacant now. And here's a street level view of the property. See, and again, the request is to go from the 2.5-story old city height district to the 3-story district. And you'll see that there are a number of structures around there that are more in keeping with that kind of 3-story. Most of them are 2-story, but there are some 3 stories in the surrounding area. And here's some more. This is a view from President Street and a view behind it of structures that back up to it from Noonan Street, and some nearby structures that have recently been built in the surrounding area. And Planning Commission did review this and recommended its approval 6-0.
All right. Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Again,
Hi there, this is Mike.
excuse me. Under the Planning Enabling Act 1994, under growth, I, Anthony G. Bryant, made public comment many years ago to the Army Corps of Engineers. regarding this whole area. And based upon the fact that it's an arrangement going on. Okay, it's an arrangement going on. Now, a congressman said on ETV, he's got a couple $1 billion that he's going to give to a city that he knows don't have in a deficit of $2 million. How can you give somebody $1 billion or close to $1 billion if it's not an earmark or indirect earmark?
All right, thank you, sir.
And Mr. Mayor, I think someone online was trying to speak as well.
Oh, sure.
If you could press *6.
Does anybody online like to speak to this matter? Please hit *6. I don't think they're out there. All right. Any question? We have a motion to approve and a second. Any comments or questions? Councilmember Seeking.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually looking at this property the other day. What's the underlying zoning on this, Christopher?
I think it matches the surrounding zoning in the neighborhood.
It's dog friendly, apparently.
I feel pretty sure, I don't have a zoning map showing the underlying zoning, but I feel pretty sure it's one of our DR1 or DR2, probably 19, 20 units an acre, something like that.
I mean, it's just an odd shaped lot with limited access. Do you know what they're going to do there?
I think the intent is to do a number of houses. They might be attached in some manner with a collective driveway easement leading into those.
So, Mr. Morgan, on the 3-story Old City, just given the FEMA district that this might be in, does that really end up equating to a 4-story where you have like a parking or storage level underneath and then 3 stories up above?
Well, typically, this is a flood hazard area, I believe. So I think you would get the credit for that ground floor if you were up to 6 feet or so for the park under area.
Right.
I don't know what their plan is as far as a height for the ground level floor, but that could, if it was too much higher above the 6 feet, it could end up counting as a story. But I think what their intent here is to do 2-story structures above the parking area.
I see.
That's what I understand. And if they were to go further than that, like for architectural merit to do another half-story, they would have to go to the BAR and voluntarily submit all the buildings to the BAR.
I see. Okay. Just, yeah.
Hi, this is Mike Levine. I'm the current owner of the lot. So the intention here would be to build only 3 stories, drive under garages, and then 2 stories above it. We believe it is within context in the neighborhood, as one of the other council members mentioned, that the houses that are all on the lot are 2.5 to 3 stories. But we feel that, and the neighborhood was in support of what we wanted to do here. So we will remain within context, we believe.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. All right. Any other questions or comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Morgan.
Okay, so now we have item E5, which is an ordinance amendment. And this relates to our vested rights section in the ordinance that's based on what the state requires as far as vested rights. This is a clarification to when applications have to be entered into with the city to extend vested rights for individual already approved projects. It helps clarify how the deadlines work, and it's been made with input from the recent North Market Rambling mediation that dealt with the vested rights extension there. And it makes clear that you do have to apply for an extension of your vested right before your original time frame expires.
Great. Thank you. Yes, if you have public comments, please come forward. Mr. Olay. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Cashin Drolet, Historic Charleston Foundation, 40 East Bay Street. On behalf of Historic Charleston Foundation, we encourage you to move this ordinance before you tonight forward this evening. As Mr. Morgan adequately stated, it makes an important clarification in the code on when a vested right has to be reinitiated after that initial 2 years expires, so that we can avoid situations like we incurred over the summer with those properties on Market Street. I think it's important to make the distinction that this is not taking away a vested right or tinkering with vested rights as are granted by the state and again in the city ordinance, but makes the important distinction of when an applicant must reapply before the expiration of those rights. I think it's important to protect the city and to provide a process by which those applying for vested rights have a certainty of when they have to do it and not do it 5 months after the expiration as we experienced over the summer. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I encourage you to move the ordinance forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Bryant.
For the record, Anthony G. Bryan, I got to make clarity that I have a lawsuit against Bank of America and Evening Post Industries, and they're located in Columbia. So under Ms. Gossett in Columbia. So I want to make sure that Anthony Bryant is in Charleston, not in Columbia, with Evening Post Industry in you. So this vested right issue, how can we identify the policies and practices issue with this issue? Or how can we establish any harm that could be done to those that are poor in the community under HUD rules and guidelines, or any other rules and guidelines due to gentrification in the city for close to 50 years? So the question is, has this ordinance been vetted by the Housing and Community Development Committee or any other committees to ensure that if somebody's an African-American or Black in this city, they're not going to be impacted negatively by this policy?
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to be heard? Hearing none, it comes to council.
I move for approval.
And we have any discussion or questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Mayor, I've got a quick question
Yes, sir.
on this, if y'all will indulge me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I completely understand the need to clarify the issue that was at the heart of the litigation over the summer, the timeliness of the application for an extension. But what I have a question about is subsection B3. And that reads, quote, any change or amendment to this chapter that would no longer allow the execution of a site-specific development plan constitutes a prohibition of the approval of the extension. And I'm just trying to get an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with that.
I believe the intent was to define for developers what would be a substantive change that would prohibit development. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I've got some familiarity with this issue with vested rights. And I think that this is a important clarification in our ordinance that has been, frankly, an open question under South Carolina law for some time. So this is a very, very good improvement along with the timeliness issue that we talked about earlier. So thank y'all.
All right, so just to make sure, for second reading again, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, the ayes have it. Now for third reading and ratification, we have a motion and second. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, the ayes have it. Mr. Morgan.
Okay, so E6 is another ordinance amendment. This is to modify exceptions to height and setback requirements in our overall height ordinance. This is to give us the opportunity to codify how our zoning staff has already interpreted these elevation issues for years. And now we're going to have it in print in the zoning ordinance. It also makes the definition of a story consistent throughout the zoning ordinance and makes it link up with how a story is defined in an Old City Height District, in the Old City Height District. We have a image here that our zoning administrator, Mr. Batchelder, prepared. I think that should be in your packages, but basically the question is this a 2 or 3 story house? Well, in all instances throughout the zoning ordinance, A would be a story, area A would be a story, area B would be a story, but area C, that kind of base story, would be a story if its base flood elevation is more than 1.5 feet below the floor, or if the lot is not located within a special flood hazard area. So this helps explain when that kind of extra area beneath it that is used for parking in many instances would be called a story or would not be called a story. And I believe we have an image of an example of a house that's in a flood hazard area that I believe it would be called a story in this instance here. This is going to, again, clarify how the zoning administrator has interpreted this on a daily basis. It's actually going to have it codified in the ordinance now by virtue of this amendment.
Please let Mr. Batchelder know that his artwork is far superior to my own. Would anyone from the public like to be heard? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
I think we'll Lee Batchelder as well. He's a great employee for the city, an outstanding human being. This is really about money. Okay, looking at this right here, if someone is in a certain income bracket with America Rescue Act money you got, CARES Act money you got, all kind of money you got in Columbia for $6 billion, whatever, how is that going to help somebody who has to elevate their house? If they can't afford to elevate their house, they got to sell their house to somebody. How is that going to create adverse harm for someone that's limited capacity to take care of their business or property that they own?
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to be heard on this? It comes to council.
Second.
Second.
We got a motion and approved. Councilmember Waring.
I'll second it for discussion. I have a response, Mr. Mayor. That's a very legitimate question that Mr. Bryant just raised. A person of limited means, how does this help this person? Can anybody answer that question? On staff or anything?
This ordinance amendment is not necessarily about raising houses. It's just about how we define a story or not a story and our heights in our height ordinances.
So this is when you do a new construction or renovation?
Correct.
Okay,
I mean, I guess it could apply if somebody was elevating a house,
Right.
you know, a historic house or something like that. It could apply as well.
Or, for example, if the Corps comes through in one of the mitigation pieces, and let's use Rosemount as an example, and you have to raise a house, would it come into play then?
Potentially, based on the height district that is in place in that neighborhood.
And that's the same, I won't put words in Mr. Bryant's mouth, certainly he can speak for himself, but that's what communicated to me. So in the event that underserved community, as Rosemount is, or for that matter, Ardmore is, have to raise their houses, how, if this wasn't in place, how would it affect the low-income people when it comes to maintaining their properties if they have to raise their property? Raise it, you know, height from a height perspective.
Well, again, this ordinance is just codifying kind of how our staff has interpreted these things over the years, just on a daily basis. It just wasn't codified in the zoning ordinance itself. I think what would happen in those instances, if somebody is having to raise a house, particularly if it's an entire neighborhood, for example, for, you know, mitigation for that neighborhood or a storm or something like that, we would definitely look at what the height districts are in that neighborhood and make sure that there was nothing from a zoning standpoint that would make it difficult for those houses to be raised.
I don't think that answers the question respectfully for the homeowner in particular, that elderly homeowner, which there are many. An example, Rosemount, in particular, as some of those streets get closer to the marsh and waterways, the reality is some of those houses probably will have to be raised. I don't want to create something that puts an additional financial burden on low to moderate income people. Those are the people that will have to sell. They'll get a decent price for their property. Problem is when they go to buy the next property, they can't afford it. So that's the, are we creating, is the unintended consequence will hurt a low to moderate income person in these settlement communities. It has to apply to the same guidelines as, you know, as Anson Bar, so to speak.
And essentially, this is how we've been interpreting this from a zoning staff standpoint on a daily basis already. This is just codifying it in the zoning ordinance for new construction, or if there were a house that were being raised or something like that. This is not addressing the issue of do houses need to be raised or not be raised. That is not what the ordinance is dealing with. This is if they are being built or requesting to be raised.
Council online would like to address the question. Chip?
Can you all see me? I can't tell if my camera's open or shut.
Barely.
Okay, is that better or worse?
No, we could see you before. You're real small on the screen. That's all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I apologize for being small on the screen. I think so. There's a little bit of confusion about flood control versus zoning. So this is really a zoning ordinance. So as far, I think it would be treated as a non-conforming use if, for instance, a underserved community, if a building were knocked down that technically has 3 stories under this new ordinance, but would be, would be 3 stories under the new ordinance, but would be considered 2 under the old ordinance. As long as they build back within, I think it's 3 years. They'd still have new flood control regulations applying, but from a zoning / use perspective, it would still be a legal non-conforming use to construct the heights sort of under the old ordinance. Does that, I know that's sort of complicated, but does that make sense?
That helps, but can we get clarification on that before we make this final? Not today, but I mean, do a little bit more work on that.
Councilmember Gregory.
Because it sounds as though there are exceptions, and correct me, Chip, if I'm wrong. If you're saying that the communities that we sort of just described may not have to meet this restriction, am I interpreting that correctly?
I think that's right. I think that if it's complicated by the flood regulations, I think you'd have to, in certain circumstances, comply with FEMA, but the building structure itself would have to comply with the zoning ordinance, the use controls, including the height ordinance in effect at the time it was built, not at the time it's rebuilt, if that makes sense. Because it's not, we're not talking about, so you'd still have to build it up, but if you built the same exact building on top of, if you built the same exact building on top of what's built up, you could do it legally under this new ordinance, even if it violates the new ordinance in that situation. Does that make sense?
I can give you just a little context too. This might help.
Okay, thanks.
The reason this came about is we've got new construction developers that want to build 2 stories over parking, throughout the city, right, in non-flood zone areas. And so if you are in a flood zone, which Rosemont would be, if someone wants to build new construction, sure, you can do parking with 2 stories on top. But what you're describing is if someone's flooded out and they have to get FEMA grants, they can build exactly what they had. We just have to make sure we follow FEMA guidelines. This is just to prevent or to clarify that if you're trying to build in an area that's not a flood zone, you can't get 2 stories over parking.
Rule kick in where if there's 50% damage, then they have to follow that. the guidelines of, the new guidelines?
That, well, like Chip was saying, we would have to make some concessions on there, especially if it's a FEMA issue and there's historic flooding and things like that. But this was mainly geared toward new construction to clarify that if you're building in a non-flood.
I understand, the new construction, no problem.
Right.
Even major renovation, no problem. It is that catastrophic event from a flood or from a hurricane for the long-term resident
Right.
that, you know, that I'm concerned about. In other words, the unintended consequence may be, and I'm not exact on this, well, let's put it like this, I don't want it to be that person's, basically they don't have the money to put back, so they're gonna have to sell off and move someplace else.
No, I understand. And this is first reading, is it not? Or is this just a public hearing? So if you want to go ahead and do first reading and we can come back
That's
after
fine.
clarifying with Lee
That-
Batchelder,
that'd be
we'll
great.
certainly do that.
I'll go
Okay.
with first reading. Thank you. Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
sir.
Thanks the time on this, Mr. Mayor, to discuss it.
Yeah, we can come back with some more discussion before second reading, but if I may offer, it just seems to me what we're trying to do here is define whether you got a 2-story house or 3-story house. And then if you were elevating it and you're only, it made it a 3-story house, but you were only allowed to build, because of the height district, to build a 2-story house, then council could come back and change the height district, right? And allow the homeowner to have his 3-story house, if that's the way it's defined. The whole issue of the money part of being able to elevate a house seems to me to be a different issue that has to be addressed through either FEMA grants, or in the case of Rosemount, you know, the conversation has been that the federal government is going to, and the city would pay for those elevations to occur. So, you know, this is just setting the definition, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. So for first reading, any more questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Number 7.
And this is a property that is a recent annexation on James Island. And it is 1819 Bentgrass Court, TMS 33403000022. It's a half-acre lot. It had already been subdivided along with other lots along the street. So the lot lines were set. It would come into the city as an RR1. That's the zoning that's recommended for it. If you look at our new city plan, it is in the low impact and conserved area, but because the lot has already been created, we would be recommending for it to come in as RR1, because that is the closest category that in the existing city zoning ordinance fits the lot size that has been created there. It also matches the lots that are on the surrounding streets with the RR1, and that's typically what we do with the recent annexations. Have some images that show the context. Again, it's fronting on the Stono River. There are other similar size lots around it, and this one is undeveloped. The Planning Commission recommended for the RR1 with a 5-0 vote.
All right. Would anybody like to be heard? Yes, sir.
I want to thank Keith Waring and Dudley Gregory for my concerns. The issue with me under the Planning Enabling Act of 1994 would be annexation, period. I made public comment to redistricting and the state Senate, August 10th, 2020 and 21, in terms of redistricting and annexation, and a lot of things has happened to dilute the vote. So the zoning power capacity that you have has to be now challenged, because you've been bringing annexations in left and right and not considering, in my opinion, minority voters. I think that this needs to be a serious question to the Biden administration in terms of what he feels about the dilution of the Black vote by city councils regarding getting their tax bases to a certain level. So I don't care how you vote in annexation, but the big question is, has annexation taken our political power from Black people?
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to be heard on this matter?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions for the annexation? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate that. And next up is approval of our city council
Move for approval.
minutes from October
Second.
26th and November 9th. Any additions, deletions, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next up is our citizens' participation period. Will be led by our Madam Clerk.
Our first speaker is Ashley Smith. And Mr. Mayor, is this for 2 minutes? Ashley Smith.
Is she
Mo-
online?
I believe she signed up online, but I don't see her.
Ashley Smith, are you online? Hit *6.
Maureen Dolan. If you're online, if you could press *6. Anthony Bryant.
Somebody asked me a question. Why did I criticize Nemiger's name? The person knew someone on the historical commission. I said, I'm not a direct lobbyist. I'm not a grassroots lobbyist. I'm just a citizen. So I asked him the question. I said, he asked me a question. He knew Mr. Rosen. I said, well, ask Mr. Rosen this question. Who is Alfred H. Stevens, the vice president of the Confederacy? Ask him this question. Who's Judah Benjamin? Judah Benjamin, the Secretary of State for the Confederacy who advised Jefferson Davis. Ask him that question. That's what I want him to ask. This school should be changed to Benjamin Franklin Butler or Thaddeus Stevens or Dudley Gregory or Keith Waring. But it's appalling to come to a school named after a racist, a perpetual bigot. That is embarrassing. Now, since you're near a school, I want to ask a question to Clyburn and many others. Is every school and library in compliance with the Protecting Children Act to the 21st century? Title I, protecting children. Title II, deleting online predators. Title III, children list brokers. Administration and Enforcement, Section 3 by the FBI, Homeland Security, and actions by states by the Attorney General's office. I need to know that. We need to know whether or not our children are safe with a public hearing around the state. Many of these cities and counties are not in compliance with the 21st Century Act. I filed a complaint on that, the Public Service Commission, before virtual learning. So you're concerned about our children, as you say. Why don't you have a public hearing on the 2007-2008 Act? You don't have it. I checked it, but you're going to make accusations about people. How can you administer and enforce something you don't even make known to the public?
Time.
Thank you, sir.
Muhammad Idris.
Evening, Mayor, City Council, Muhammad Idris. I really enjoy the prayer that Councilman Appel made. One thing he said in that, he said that justice, that we should stand on justice. When we look at the statue of justice, they got blindfolders on it. You can't see right, left, or whatever. And we have a scale. And the scale is like this, that represent balance in the community. And we know that the poor do not get balance. This is not about a blanket white and black issue. That's been gone. Racism is dead. This is about greed, envy, jealousy, and ignorance. When I go up to Golden Corral, I see just as much poor white folks up there trying to get a good meal. When I go to Walmart, I see the same. I go to the dollar store, I see the same. So this is not about black and white. This is about corruption. And the foundation of corruption is greed, envy, jealousy, and ignorance. So we hope that you all have a blessed remaining month, and you have a blessed Thanksgiving, and enjoy December, the birth of Christ, who came to get justice for the poor, because the rich didn't want him in the hotels. He was born in a barn. He can afford the big hotel prices. So we are asking you to get your act together,
Time.
because we are going to seek justice in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I believe Ashley Smith may have joined us online. Ms. Smith, if you're online, if you could press *6. Ashley Smith.
Hello.
Hi,
Can
we
y'all
can
hear
hear
me?
you.
Okay, sweet. I just wanted to quick. My name's Ashley Smith, and I'm just speaking today to ask the council to revisit the Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation, and to urge the council to vote in favor of making the commission a permanent committee. I just wanted to speak on this because we must come together as a city to acknowledge and repair what has been done to Charleston's Black community. As a city, we must ensure future generations have the opportunity to grow and thrive in a just and equitable community. And especially in light of recent events happening in our country, Charleston has the opportunity to step up as leaders and set a precedent by establishing a permanent commission on equity. Again, I just wanted to ask y'all to reconsider and vote yes for the commission. And that was it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being with us.
And Mr. Mayor,
Great,
we did
thank
not
you.
receive any comments by phone or online, so that was all we had.
All right, so thank you very much. That ends our public participation. Thanks, everybody who participated tonight. Next, we move on to our petitions and communications. First up, we have an appointment by Councilmember Appel for service on our Citizen Police Advisory Council, Jack Handigan III.
Second.
Second.
And when you say all the appointments, do you mean one, all under number one, the Design Review Committee advisory members, the CTC, and the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee? Any objection? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Mr. Mayor, if I might just very briefly, I'd just like to point out to Councilmember Appel that Jack Handigan III, who is going to be a fine representative of the Citizens Police Advisory Committee, as of today, became a resident of District 8. So thank you.
Wow.
So if you thought you were spreading patronage in your district, it didn't work.
I'm going to let y'all work that out.
I'll give you his address offline. Very close to mine.
Okay, next up, we have a presentation from Haygood Morrison representing our Army Corps 3x3 Advisory Committee. Haygood has served as chair of the committee since its inception earlier this year, and I see at least one of their members here. Haygood, I'll call on, ask you to recognize any other members here. But before he gives this report, and I think y'all know this, they have done a remarkable job this year. The time, the devotion, the dedication that they have put into this topic. These are citizens that really care passionately about this city and protecting it and trying to do the right thing by Charleston. And so I just want to thank you, Haygood, and your committee for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's our pleasure. So, Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is Haygood Morrison Jr., and certainly appreciate y'all's time here today. I'm the chair of the Army Corps 3x3 Advisory Committee. So on
Can,
behalf of the
can
committee-
you speak just a little closer into the
Yeah,
microphone? Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Better.
So anyway, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to present our recommendations and conclusions to council here today. Over the last 10 months, the committee spent countless hours studying, analyzing, and debating the many facets of the Charleston Peninsula Perimeter Protection Wall. I want to thank the committee members for their commitment and professionalism in their work. Here today on the committee, well, of course, on the staff front, we have Dale Morris and Kaylin Casella, and Kevin Mills and Cashin Drolet, who are on the committee with me as well. So certainly many thanks to them.
And Bob Habig.
And
too.
Bob.
Bob
And
Habig.
Bob.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't met Bob in person, so good to meet you, Bob.
It's been all virtual, huh?
It has been all
Oh,
virtual.
oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's the sign of the times, I guess. So our research has resulted in a sobering recognition of the risk of storm surge to the peninsula and to the region's economy. The need to ensure other drainage and flood mitigation work continues on the peninsula, and the many potential impacts such a structure could have on the city. In order to mitigate some of these impacts, the committee developed a series of recommendations based on what we believe must be addressed and resolved. In addition to the recommendations we provided on October 12th regarding the need for a comprehensive water management plan, a Rosemont resiliency study, and a review of the east side alignment, we have three additional recommendations today regarding the next phase of PED, or the preliminary engineering and design phase, staffing recommendation, a recommendation regarding our committee's timeline, and natural and nature-based features recommendation. So y'all all have these recommendations in your packet. So the one that I will read word for word is the recommendation regarding our move into PED, our recommendation regarding PED. Aside from that, I'll provide a brief summary and happy to discuss any detail. So our conclusion is that while it requires further diligence, perimeter protection is a key facet of an overall water management system. We also strongly encourage the City of Charleston to pursue, coordinate, advocate, and fund all key capital projects to achieve an integrated water management system. As such, and subject to additional study, we recommend the City of Charleston move cautiously into the preliminary engineering and design phase, or PED. We urge the City of Charleston to work closely and diligently with the Army Corps of Engineers to design and engineer a peninsula surge structure which accomplishes its goals of reducing storm surge risk and minimizes impacts on landowners and historic resources, as well as key stakeholders and their properties. Also, one that fits with the design aesthetic and fabric of the peninsula and its historic nature and strengthens an overall water management system. The remaining three recommendations are recommendation regarding natural and nature-based features, which recommends that the city work with the Corps to better incorporate natural and nature-based features, and the details of which are outlined in that recommendation text you have. Also, a recommendation that the city evaluate and act upon an evaluation of the staffing and potential need for increased level of staffing during the PED phase, at which time the work will become a lot more detailed and time intensive. And finally, that the committee continue engagement with the Corps and the city throughout the preliminary engineering and design process. And thank you all very much for your time here today.
Thank you again for your service. Let's keep you at the mic for just a minute in case any of our council members have a question for you. Councilmember Griffin.
Thank you so much for that information. I'm just wondering, did y'all take a vote to recommend moving into the next phase, or was it unanimous? Was it the majority?
Yeah, we did take a vote. So at the meeting, I believe we determined we had a quorum. We took a vote. The vote at the meeting was unanimous. We also received 2 additional letters, which don't count towards the vote, but we're in support of the recommendation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr.
I think we lost your
Sorry,
microphone.
I really,
Hold your button.
having not sat in on every single 3x3 meeting. I know there were multitudes, but I certainly observed and watched and listened and took my own notes as you all were deliberating. And I feel like your group has been the epitome of what we would hope citizens advisory committees will provide to our education as a set of leaders making, very complicated and protracted decisions, as well as creating the opportunity to have confidence from the public in the way that you did deliberate and the way that you built consensus. I heard many disagreements, and a lot of times that sort of quashes the fervor of a group like this that's trying to be, collegial and communicative and on Zoom and, having all of the disparities of your own lifestyles and things like that. But to a person, you hung in there, you never allowed people to just sort of, get the last word without any follow-up or what's going to happen next. And I think that that's just exemplary in the way that we would really want people to, that we have an amazing future ahead of us as a city and a region. And this is just a municipal decision-making process right now. But in talking to all my colleagues and people, around the region, we are the low country. So we need to continue to hold high the way that we address some of these, hard decisions into the future. And I think you all have set the bar to a level that we can be proud of. And I hope you get written up in Next City, how communities deal with city, because you've done an amazing job with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember.
So if I may add another comment, go ahead, Councilmember Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for your service to the city on heading this committee and for the entire makeup of your committee. Is your recommendation that we adopt what has already been presented by the Army Corps?
So maybe ask that question a different way. I think I see where you're going with that, but if you could provide a little more color on that question.
Well, we've received from the Army Corps a specific proposal, and it shows designs, it shows walls, it shows gates, it shows pump stations, locations of all that stuff. Is your commission, your committee recommending that we adopt what has been presented to us by the Army Corps?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification. I think that helps answer the question. I think the answer is no, but the longer answer is that this preliminary engineering and design phase will help incorporate all the recommendations that we've set forward. In the event that we reach an impasse, it's been clarified by the Corps and by us several times by the city that we can part ways. And so in the event that we find a point that we just can't come to an agreement on, at that time, we've put forward the diligent effort to create a perimeter protection system. And it didn't end up working out, but ideally, we do reach an agreement and do create something that works.
Well, do you think that at some point that your committee will have a specific recommendation to this council as to what this wall or design supposed to look like should be?
So there are several unanswered questions, which we believe will be answered during this PED phase. So at this point, our recommendation is to, the key word being cautiously move into this preliminary engineering and design phase where we can begin to create the questions to be answered, or the Corps can. Yes, sir. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregory, and then Mitchell.
One of the objectives has to do with nature-based solutions. Will the PED get into nature-based solutions as well? do a comparison between the wall versus nature base? And will there be just as much funding available if the city wanted to do more nature-based, if it's feasible, nature-based solutions?
You know, I'll probably bring up Dale or Kalen to help me answer that question. The Corps has incorporated in the most recent document some natural and nature-based features, which is great. And you know, one of our recommendations calls for, really urges additional study and incorporation of natural and nature-based features. The payment for those is still a question, I think, frankly. Bill, do you have any additional comments there?
Sure. Thank you, Hagan. Let me, just before I answer the question, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Chairman Hagan for leading this commission. It was an impossible job he took on. He did a great job doing this. He's not an engineer, but he has learned a whole lot, and he's just did a fantastic job, and it is a wonderful expression of citizenship. So on my behalf, thank you. Regarding feasibility, Councilman Gregory, on nature-based features, the Army Corps of Engineers has brought in a number of nature-based features outboard of the combo wall in the marsh, and that is to help protect that. We have said in the city comments, the Army Corps of Engineers, which are now part of the formal record, we want to pursue more IMPED, and we will. You have my commitment to, if I'm part of this process, I will do that. I believe in them where they're appropriate. They don't mitigate surge risk, but if they provide an additional environmental benefit and other benefits, we should work for them. They can be used as what's called environmental mitigation, and they can be pursued, if not in an environmental mitigation aspect, they can be pursued as a betterment, which is something then the city and the city would have to pay for in addition to its other costs. But those are things we explore in PED. I don't know if that's satisfactory, if that answers your question.
But would we be able to say in lieu of X, we want Y?
That's part of PED, is you're actually negotiating where the structure exactly goes, because the feasibility studies determine, is it feasible on public property? That was the starting point. Is it constructible? Do we have the subsurface? Is it feasible? And is there a federal interest? We talked about that. There is a federal interest because of this high BCR. So the federal government is willing to say, look, we have a federal interest, we'll help you pay for this. When you get into PED, that's when you negotiate, as I tried to explain before, this is a negotiation between the federal sponsor and the local sponsor, exactly where it goes, exactly what it looks like, exactly how it functions, and exactly what additional features you add to it. And again, those can be within the Army Corps regulations. If they fall within those, what we're asking for, that is a cost shared effort, 65-35, federal 65, local 35. If we decide we want them and they don't reduce the surge risk mitigation, we have to maintain the same level of surge risk mitigation with whatever we add to it. If it doesn't reduce that surge risk mitigation, then we discuss how we pay for it. And then the city will be asked to consider it as a betterment. And then the city council will be asked, do you want to pursue this? So that's a negotiation that will occur during PED.
The same level of funding would be available for natural or nature-based solutions as it would for a wall?
So natural and nature-based features, an oyster sill or a marsh or a mangrove will not reduce surge for the peninsula. So your primary federal interest here is to mitigate surge risk. We can add additional benefits to those, and there are a number of nature-based features within the cost right now, and those are there. If I can be particularly or more exact here, there is an opportunity in my mind when you look at Brittlebank Park as a spot where you could think of an additional or adding nature-based features to increase or enhance surge risk reduction and make that an amenity, more of an amenity and less of an unattractive gray wall through that area, which is what's been put forth in the feasibility phase. That is something that we should do. There are other places on the peninsula where we can think about adding nature-based features in. And again, if they achieve environmental mitigation benefits, they're part of the project cost. If they provide other benefits that are not related to surge risk reduction or environmental mitigation, they become a betterment and the city can add them in, provided they don't reduce the surge risk. This is all very complex, but there are opportunities here, and it's very clear that I think we need to try to pursue these in PED.
Thanks, Dale. And I think we need to thank you as well for what you've done. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, I would like to thank you both for what you have done. But as you remember, I think when I was up there, when you all came up to Rosemont, and there was a lot of questions that was asked up to Rosemont, and they're still asking questions to me as of today. They're really thinking about resilience so far as having money, and which they want the city to put money in the 2022 budget for a resilient plan for Rosemont, because they know that there's no wall going to be there, but with the marsh area that the water is coming over and affecting the houses there now, even some of our police officers that live there, they're having problem with the water coming over from the marsh into the homes, which is pretty bad up in that area. And when you talk with nature-based, I was looking at that, is something has to be done there. So they're looking more at, even without the wall, if they build a wall or not. If they build a wall, that's not going to stop them from having the problem that they're having now, because the wall is not going up that further up to Rosemont. So I look at it very seriously, and they're texting me, calling me, and they're really up an uproar up in Rosemont. The same thing going to happen to Bridgeview. There's not going to be anything there, but the water is coming over there. It floods when you just have a normally storm there, just a high tide, if you may, and it's flooding. Sometimes you can't even get into into Bridgeview. So I don't know if the wall going to do that to help anything at all in those particular areas, even if they was building it in that area, which they're not going to do it. And another problem that I have personally is that they said Congress is going to appropriate this money if we build a wall, but in the next 3 years, might have a totally different Congress. They might not even see it that way anymore. So what's going to happen then? Will the city be liable to come up with all this money? We don't know. So we are speculating what's going to happen, because I know in 3 years you're going to have a new Congress. I know that as a fact. So it's just a trust factor a little bit I don't have right now with all this going on. I think we need to come up with some other mechanism, even with the flooding. We need to really look at the flooding that's happening in the city of Charleston as we speak as now. You know, people are flooding themselves out, but just without the storm surge, we are being flooded every day, you know, with this high tide is coming in. So I'm looking at mostly fixing the flood that we have to deal with already, and looking at the wall myself. So this is what a lot of people are concerned about, and this is what a lot of people are talking about in my community, in the community I represent. This is what they're talking about more than just the wall. They're talking about more of the flooding that we are dealing with for all these years, that without a storm surge, all these years we didn't have, you know, we have storms, but it wasn't come up, wasn't bad as people speculating it. So we need to deal with what we have to deal with now, you know, and that's where I'm looking at it right now. And that's what my constituents are saying in all the areas I represent.
So if I may address that for just a moment, and feel free to jump in, but one of the recommendations of the committee is, in addition to doing a comprehensive water plan, to fill in all the gaps of all the studies and other plans that the city has done. And you might have seen Mr. Morris sent out a one-pager the other day to talk about what that means, what a comprehensive water plan means for us. But another recommendation is to really drill down and be more specific with Rosemount in particular, and to have a Rosemount resilience study recommendation. Isn't that correct? And so I've been talking with Mr. Morris about this over the last week, and we did propose in our 2022 budget of $500,000 for water plan study, the comprehensive water plan. I would propose to council when we take up the budget next week, that we specify that a portion of that money go specifically to what I hear they're asking for, and I think the committee is recommending, and I agree with, that we should have a specific Rosemount resilience study done along with the comprehensive water plan. It may mean that we'll have to find a little more money than the 500 that we've proposed for next year, but we don't have definitive quotes on those two items yet. Anyway, do you want to add anything to what I just said? Hey, good. Does that make sense?
One more question, Mr. Mayor, before they answer the question. Even up there in particular, in that particular area, they were talking to more when they spoke about, trying to do what they're going to do up in that particular area. And a lot of people got really, really upset because when they asked the Corps, supposedly if they do this and they have to build their house again, and some of the houses are on slabs. And they said, well, sometime you might have to, you might lose your home. That put them in an uproar up in that area. And people don't even want that to happen because they know they can't rebuild again. They can't afford it. So this is a problem they have in there because a lot of the houses are built on slabs. So it can't raise those homes with a 3x3. And this is a problem that they're having up there, Mr. Mayor. They're an uproar up there and they're calling me and jumping on my neck, but I can go so far. So this is what happened even when you all had the meeting up there and you all heard all this. They asked those same questions. They were up there and asked us the questions, but asked, what's going to happen if you can't raise my home? And that's what the Corps said, well, then we might have to, the house might be torn down or have to be eliminated.
No, I think they might have to get a new home.
Well, they ain't telling me the new home.
Yeah.
No, they're not saying no new home. So the people are not.
Can I ask Mr. Morris and Morris to address that?
So I have 3 items here. Let me try to hold them in my active memory for this latter issue. If you move into PED, if the council decides to move into PED, Rosemont and Bridgeview are in PED phase 1, so we'll start to address those issues. A surveyor will be sent out, an engineering company sent out to survey all the homes to find out which ones can be elevated. Not all the homes in Ridgemont need to be elevated because the center of the neighborhood, as you know, is fairly high. It's the homes near the marsh that are lower that would need to be elevated. They would survey those homes and say, okay, this is safe to elevate, and this one is not safe to elevate, or we have questions. If there's questions, they'll survey further. Most homes can be elevated, even if there's a lot of technology that you can use to elevate homes. If there is a home that cannot be elevated, if the Corps engineer said, then we'll have to tear it down, what the Corps of Engineers meant is that it would be torn down at federal expense, at project budget expense, and rebuilt for them on that location at project expense. So if there's a tear down required to allow this project to move forward, that's if the house is just unable to be elevated because it's structurally unsound, then there would be a tear down, and there are federal requirements for how that works. And as the mayor said, when those homes are elevated, for the people who do need their homes to be elevated, if we proceed, within the project budget is the money to pay for the relocation, the temporary location of the family or the tenant or the homeowner for there. And again, that the Corps of Engineers in the city would work on that together. That is considered a project expense. It is within this context.
And you're referring to a temporary relocation
Yes,
until the new home is built?
Yes, sir.
On the same location?
Exactly. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Exactly. So the trouble, the reason why Rosemont could not have a wall is because if you put a wall around Rosemont, you would have to tear down a lot of the homes on the margin of the community, and that would be permanent. And both the Corps and the city determined that was not something it wanted to do. This is a distinct, tight-knit community. It needs to stay intact. So without the wall, that enables this to occur. So keep that in mind, that the desire to avoid the tear-downs is what requires the non-structural solution up there. Okay, and if you have a wall, you're gonna have to tear down the homes on the margin of the neighborhood where you place the wall. And you may have to tear down and permanently eliminate other homes because the way drainage comes down through that neighborhood off the streets from the high ground to the low ground, you would probably have to put a small pump station at the bottom of each street, which requires space and energy, and they are noisy when they run. So that was deemed to be undesirable. So that's why non-structural solutions became the feasibility recommendation on this. Let me say one more thing. I am in regular contact with some of the folks in Rosemont. I am listening as closely as I can to try to work with them on what solutions are acceptable. We have talked about what a resilience plan, if funded, if we proceed down the road, what that might mean for them. They would have to engage with the city and the planning department and others to make sure this was well, but that's what a resilience plan would tee up. So we are taking very seriously the needs of this community. And again, I think the discussions are fruitful. And I am also having off-the-record discussions with other folks who could possibly help fund a portion of this. Again, no promises, but I'm teeing up those conversations.
Mr. Mayor, I have to commend him because he is doing what he said he was doing, and they don't, and Rosemont, they don't want the wall anyway. They said up frank, we don't want any wall up here. They said that up. So even when the Corps was there, they told the Corps we don't want a wall here. So even if it was building a wall, they don't want it anyway. So these are the things you have to work through with because most of the people up there are homeowners, and that whole area is mostly homeowners. So it was living there so long, and some of them are seniors, and they're afraid of what's going to happen because they don't want to go. So this is the problem they're running into.
I understand. It'll take a lot of work.
I thank you all too.
But we're up to the task.
Mayor, just one more while I got you, Dale. This one's a pretty basic question. King tides. The wall's not gonna do anything about king tides.
That's not.
I'm asking. And where I'm going with it is, it's not an either or to me. It is an and. And so my question is, how will we be able to do both? We already know we're at 600 million for Calhoun West. That exceeds our contribution to the wall. We're already close to $1 billion. And again, I'm saying it's not an either or, it's an and. So how do we do both? Or can we do both? Or will one enhance the other? I think it's where the mayor was responding.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So a comprehensive, Councilman Mitchell, you started with the idea of there are numerous flood risks around the city. Again, the city of Charleston faces every type of flood risk there is. So not unique, but this is a big challenge. And we know it's a big challenge, and the challenge is not going to decrease. So we have to be serious about this. And one of the things we have that the mayor just mentioned is the move to a comprehensive water plan. We have components of it in existence. We haven't knitted it together, and there are some missing components. We need to do gap analysis, and we'll do that if we move to a water plan. That will help us understand and prioritize where do you get the most benefit with which investment in which place. And this is citywide. This is not peninsula. The comprehensive water plan is that. For surge risk mitigation, we have the Army Corps of Engineers feasibility proposal, and we'll negotiate how that gets done in PED. One of the benefits of having the surge structure around the peninsula, if we proceed down that road, is there are a number of gate structures on it. There are pedestrian gates to allow tourists and homeowners to navigate it where needed. There are road gates because at some places you're going to have to close off a road when a hurricane's here, not every day, just when the hurricane's nearby or hitting the city. There are railroad gates. There's a couple possible railroad gate crossings. And then there are tidal gates. This is where the wall will be out in the marsh or in the water. And when a hurricane is coming at the low tide before that hurricane strike or that tropical system strike or the mean low water level of 8 foot, this is in the TSP. If that is predicted an 8-foot king tide, at the low tide preceding that, the structure in the tidal gates, they can be closed. So now the water that would have come in exceeding 7-foot minor tide or 7.6-foot moderate tide or 8-foot major tide or king tide, all that water will be held outside the city. And then the storage area, the capacity that is now within the city that you would lose with a minor flood or a moderate flood is now available for stormwater storage if in fact that tropical storm or hurricane comes along with rain. Sometimes they have a lot of rain with them and sometimes they don't. But you now have a resilience component here with this additional space because you stop that tide from coming in. Okay, and then when the storm passes, you would open up the gates and whatever water was impounded by the closure of that structure would move away. What this does, so you now you're able to control the tidal influence, and you don't have to close every tidal structure. You can say, look, we know it's an 8'2" coming in. Okay, we know that 8'2" is going to impact the Ashley River side of the peninsula, and maybe it'll impact the Newmarket Creek watershed, but it's not going to affect the rest of the peninsula. So you then operate it in those areas and you leave the other tidal parts of the structure open, provided you have confidence that the water is not going to come over and get to the rest of the city. This is something that you do in design to make sure that you have this primary surge risk mitigation benefit that the federal government shows that we need, and they're willing to help us pay for, but then we get this ancillary benefit. This is not to manage these king tides. This is not a primary benefit that the Corps of Engineers is going to clap their hands for, but it is something that we are able to secure by going forward with it. This feasibility study is for surge, but we get tidal benefit from it. So this is one of the reasons why I'm supportive of moving forward, because we'll get this additional benefit.
One question I will ask Mr. Mayor.
Yes, yes, sir.
I think might go to you. Like I mentioned before, if, and the fact that right now Congress said they're working with the Corps of Engineers, that they promise these dollars, if you may. In the event that a new Congress come and say, no, we're not going to do it, what's going to happen? We because it's a promise now, but we don't know what's going to happen later. Because I know that this is the kind of question I'm asking. I'm trying to do a vision and looking ahead, because some people say one thing this time because they're in place now, but they're not going to be in place later in 3 years.
Well, Lord knows we have a political system in place, but this is one occasion where our government has set up, our federal government has set up a more objective system to define what they're going to spend money on. And that's why this cost benefit ratio that they've come up with so far of 10.2 is so meaningful, because it really shouldn't matter whether Democrats or Republicans are in charge, because the federal government has figured out that for every dollar they spend, they're going to save $10. And in this case, I think money trumps politics, no pun intended. Did I say that right?
Yes, sir. Again, with a 10.2 BCR, Congress will fund this. And when a project starts, Congress does not like this to stop the study these days, because it's wasted money, right? So with a high BCR, if you're successful in PED, it's an if. Can we negotiate with the Corps the structure that we need for the city? That's what we do in PED. If we get to the point where we have designed a structure and engineered a structure that works for the city, then you all, your successors, will be asked, should we build it? And every year there will be a budget submitted by the Corps of Engineers. This is what we need to do next year, and council will get to weigh in. Do you spend the money or not? And if you have to pause the study, you can pause the study. But let me answer a question I think I heard, is if we decide to move into PED or eventually move into construction, your question was, if the Army Corps of Engineers stops funding it, is the city on the hook? The answer is absolutely not, because if the federal government is not paying its share, they can't ask the city to pay its share. And the other way around, the city I want to be careful, but the city has the ability to control how the studies move forward because the federal government, the Corps of Engineers cannot proceed into the next year of its study without what's called a willing local sponsor. And the way you signify a willing local sponsor is you and your successor saying, we're going to put in the money next year to do next year's work. Because if you withhold that money, the Corps will pause their study because they don't have a willing federal sponsor in that year, a local sponsor in that year. So there's a lot of control that the city has. And again, the city is not on the hook for the whole $1.1 billion if the Corps pulls out. The study would be paused, or the study would be stopped, or the effort would be stopped. And I really don't think Congress will renege on this project. It is such a high BCR. As I mentioned before, it is the #1 priority for the Army Corps of Engineers in the entire region from the Virginia-North Carolina border to the Mississippi-Louisiana border. This is the #1 recommend design and engineering work for the Army Corps of Engineers. Why? Because you have a very dense peninsula that is easy to protect with a surge wall around it. It is not a complex project. As complex as it is for the Army Corps of Engineers, this is not a complex project because it's not running through marsh, and it's not running through neighborhoods they're being separated. It's not running down the middle of Brickell Avenue in Miami. This is a fairly comprehensive, condensed sort of environment to protect. So it will most likely be successful with federal funding.
And Dale, when you use the word study, that same concept applies to pad and construction, right?
Yes.
So that if there's a pause, it could happen. I mean, after we build, if we got to phase 1, which is on the Ashley River side, and we got that built, and the future city council decided we've done enough, we don't want to do no more, we can say quit, right?
Yes, sir. That's
Yeah.
correct. As we know, the risk on the Ashley River side is very high with the medical district and all the medical provisioning that comes from that area. It is why it's PED phase 1. So if the city would decide, okay, we're happy with PED phase 1, we're happy with phase 1, the city could pause the study too. The federal government may not like that because they have a coherent structure they've designed and engineered for the entire peninsula. But there is that flexibility for the Army, for the city to say, okay, we're going to stop now.
Councilmember Griffin.
Are we still planning to take a vote on this next month?
I believe so, because we're just waiting for the Corps to redraw the map just a little bit. They're accommodating the Port Authority. And so we were going to wait for that, get it, and then take action. I wasn't planning on asking for any action tonight, but we take the 3x3 committee recommendations at heart. And the comment I want to make earlier was to say that, this committee got together, and it would have been real simple for them to get together and just say, yeah, the core project, go forward or not. But no, they really drilled down. They made recommendations about a comprehensive water plan. They made recommendation about a resiliency plan for Rosemount. They made recommendations to try to use more nature-based features. They made recommendations about our staff. They made recommendations to continue the life of this committee so that, assuming we went to PED, that they would continue to give us guidance and advice along the way. So again, they were so thoughtful in the work that they've done. We've all said thank you, but I say it one more time, thank you for your work. And I did want to go back to Councilmember Gregory's question about the title, the king tides. And if I may just put it a little more simply than Dale's explanation, if we had this west side portion of the wall in place, and we had that tide just a few weeks ago, and it's designed as Dale described, you would not have had all that water in Charleston Village. Because of the ability to control the tidal flow coming into the city. And that's not a hurricane. That's just a tide over 8 feet that we will have that kind of management and flexibility. And yeah, down the road, that's going to be on the city to manage that and maintain it. But I mean, is it worth it to be able to keep the water out of the city? That's what decisions we'll have to make.
Councilmember Gregory, can you use your microphone? Thank you.
It prevents the surge, okay? If I'm hearing you correctly, because of keeping that water out, are we saying that water that comes up from the ground because of the high tide would be prevented? Is that what we're saying from happening?
Yes, so I asked the Army Corps of Engineers a couple weeks back. There are piles for the major supports for the wall, and in between the piles, they will use sheet piling, concrete coated metal. It is most likely, this is what you do in PED, you design how deep you have to go to stop the groundwater transfer of water from, water wants to find a level, and if it's unequal on both sides, sorry, I talk with my hands, but if it's unequal on both sides and there's a groundwater connection, it's going to equal out, which is how the water's coming up from underneath. So you would then look to see how deep you have to drive that sheet pile to stop that water transfer. And I don't think there's a guarantee that it is watertight. 5% of that groundwater, 10% of water may come in, but that's a whole lot less water that's coming in now. So you have that groundwater condition. And one of the things we know from the Dutch dialogues and the land and water analysis is that the groundwater system, we don't know enough about the groundwater, the shallow groundwater systems here throughout the city. And this is one of the things that I would like to pursue with the water plan, is to get a better understanding of that. There are numerous resources that have bits and pieces of this information. We don't have it knitted, and we need to knit that together to understand how the groundwater is working, because sometimes it's shallow and connected, and sometimes it's shallow and disconnected, and that helps you design then how to manage it. And I'll just say one thing, because I'm going to look at each one of you. I'm new to the city. I've spoken with some of you in recent weeks about this one-on-one. I would like to speak with each of you one-on-one about this, because I can answer your questions. And I'm happy to do that at your convenience, at your time. And I don't care if it's a Sunday evening at 6 o'clock or a Friday morning at 7 a.m. You tell me, I'll be there. Please.
Thank you.
That answer was very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Appel.
I'll just be real quick. I encourage each one of my colleagues to make a date with Dale. Dale was gracious enough to come to my office last Thursday night. Really appreciate sitting down with you. We sat for about an hour and a half, and he brought maps, and I had a lot of questions. He answered them all. This is a complicated process. We're not going to understand this by just getting updates at council meetings. We've got to dig into this. And we have a wonderful resource here with the city. And I just want y'all to encourage everybody to make a date with Dale, like me. Thank you. And thank you, Haygood. You're doing a great job.
Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief. I used to think that the hardest job of any appointed citizen in the city was being the chairman of the Planning Commission, which Frank McCann did for 25 years, and it's amazing he's still sane. Or being head of the BZA, which Lenny Krawcheck did for 46 years. But they have now been supplanted and replaced. The hardest job for any citizen in this community is to be the chairman of the 3x3 Commission. And I just want to say, Councilmember Appel, much like Jack Handigan, our chairman of this committee, Hagan Morrison, lives in District 8. So, which by the way, he lives on the Ashley River side of District 8, not a stone's throw from all the water we're talking about. And I just want to make a few comments. By the way, the other committee members that are here, I'm going to start with Bob Haygood, because Bob Haygood was my roommate in high school, sorry. Bob Habig, who also lives in District 8, but Kevin Mills and Cashin Drolet, it has been an enormous amount of work. There's also two other members of that committee, and one of them is Councilmember Waring, and I'm the other. And the amount of time that we have put in, and we've been listening members of this committee. We have really, at the beginning, said we're here to listen and to hear what the committee says. We did not, by the way, take part in the vote that was brought before you tonight. We abstained because we thought it'd be funny to tell you all how to vote from your own council members, once you get to vote. And you'll hear from us at the appropriate time. But I would like just to make a couple of points. And good on Mr. Morrison for answering Councilmember Shade's question, which was pointed, and that is this. There is still a lot of work to be done, not by this committee and not by this council, but by the Army Corps. The alignment that you've seen in the report that's out right now is, according to them, not the final alignment, not the final place that they want to put this wall. They've made some advanced concessions that are going to move it, especially on the east side. Hasn't happened yet. So some of this is preliminary and more to come on that. But that committee, if the line stays where it is, I think I'm fair to say would be unanimously against this project because it leaves the east side out, right? I mean, I think that was clearly spoken, that there is the broad expectation that the Army Corps, before we even get to this council for a vote on whether to go forward with PED, and I want to make a comment about it in a second, that line is going to move, right? I mean, I think we can all agree about that. Secondly, just because words are really going to matter going forward as we think about this project, it's arguably, well, not arguably, it's going to be the biggest infrastructure project any of us is ever going to have to consider, and the 12 people around this table vote on. PED does not stand for preliminary engineering and design. It stands for pre-construction engineering and design. I just want to make sure that the record's clear that when something comes to us for PED, it's not preliminary. The feasibility study is done, and then we move into PED. And I absolutely agree. Everyone here should spend some time with Dale, regardless of whether you want to talk about this wall or not, because he's fascinating. We tooled all around the Netherlands with him, and if it wasn't for him, we never would have gotten back. And it's still amazing, by the way, that Councilmember Gregory did. We lost him for a day, but he made it back. Mayor, I think we lost you for a day. I think we lost you for a day, Mayor. I don't remember. Anyway, but I would, and this is a big ask for a part-time council, but before you go and sit down with Mr. Morris, please, and this is a big ask because it is 300 pages long, 300 pages, 297. I read it twice. Read the Army Corps study so you come equipped with questions about what they're actually doing and you understand that language. Dale is fluent in that language. We are not. But if you read through it, I think it will be very, very helpful to you as it comes back to us. This is massive. I don't want to get in the merits of it yet, but I think just understanding it and reading that report, which will only, I think, change the alignment. Not much of the language in there is going to change. I mean, the alignment is going to change, but if you read the language, it's pretty clear. So, boy, read it. It's long. I think if I asked around this table of those who've actually read it so far, other than Dale, I'm probably the only one, perhaps Councilmember Waring as well. Before we vote on it, we gotta understand it. So with that, you're now the new king of the commissions. And by the way, this commission wants to self-perpetuate. They want us to continue on with them. I don't know why on earth you're going to ask that question of us somewhere down the road, but I suspect we'll do it if you really want it. And I'm interested to hear, Mayor, that we're actually going to take this up, you think, in December? Okay. Well, more to come from the members of the commission and the committee, but Councilmember Waring, thank you for your service on that committee because it's a huge amount of time, huge. So with that, we'll see you in December. Thanks.
Anybody else? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next item. Thank you. Hey, good. Appreciate it. And all you other committee members. Next up is an update on the city's response to COVID-19. Tracy is already off for Thanksgiving holiday. I will just share with you that although cases are up in the United States, I'm told 27% in the last 14 days and up 6% in the state of South Carolina in the last 14 days. Thankfully, their cases are only up 2% in Charleston County. So we're keeping our numbers down. 59% in our county are fully vaccinated compared with 51 in the state of South Carolina. So once again, we've done a little better. over 90% of city employees are now fully vaccinated. 99.7% of our employees had complied with our vaccination policy by yesterday. And I believe the count this morning is there were only 2 full-time employees that had not complied with the policy. So it's really great. And I must tell y'all, everybody really worked hard to make that happen. All the department heads, but mostly our HR department, and tip of the hat to Kate Cross. She really put forth a tremendous effort over the last few months to make sure our employees are safe and our citizens that interact with us. So we did, as of yesterday, go officially to what we call phase 4, which is our least restrictive policy about COVID, since our numbers are doing what they are, going down, and are at least staying flat at a low level now, and our employees are basically fully vaccinated. So and that also led to our policy that in city facilities, masks are no longer required to be worn unless you have not been vaccinated. We ask you to wear a mask. So those are some changes in our policy. Hopefully, the numbers will continue to go well here in Charleston, but I will caution everyone to keep your eyes open, and we're going to follow the numbers, as I said, in the country, and I've seen some other places around the world where numbers are heading back up. And so, you know, it's going to be like the flu, you know, for years and years to come, I believe, where we're going to have to maintain caution, take booster shots and other medical advice in order to live with this virus. It's almost like going to the Netherlands to learn to live with water, maybe. Okay, so any questions on any of that? Okay, so next up is our council committee reports. First up is Committee on Community Development. Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, Council. Community Development met on the 18th at 3:30, and we had a couple of items under new business, and we didn't have any action taken. We had 1 and 3, which was no action taken, but we had a lot of information given to us, even under the presentation on economic empowerment strategy from the report on equity, inclusion, and racial conciliation. We have a lot of different information received, and we are moving forward. And number 3, I'm going to skip number 2, but number 3 is an update on affordable housing development. We had some information given to us then, and presentation given to us then at the meeting. And if we go back to number 2, which is A2, we had an update on accessory dwelling units and affordable period, which is we send it on to the Planning Commission, which we're changing for 30 years on the Affordability Act on that particular for the affordable housing period. And that's going to be 30 years. So we send it to the Planning Commission. We make a recommendation because of some of the council members had to leave. So we just make a recommendation to send it on to planning. So once it come back from planning, it'll be coming here, but that's why we make that recommendation, just to send it on.
Right.
So that's it's still at 30. I think it's 30. It's still 30 years. Because we had some problem with the 40 years. If in the 40 years, we had to do some more changing to it, and it was going to cause a little problem. So we're going to do 30 years, and then we can always come back and look at something later on. So that's the extent of my report.
Right. Any questions, Councilmember Appel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chairman Mitchell, for that report. And my apologies for having to leave the meeting early. I was actually running to my meeting with Dale, which we just mentioned. So I just have to state, I am strongly opposed to having any affordability restrictions on accessory dwelling units. It shouldn't be for 40 years. It shouldn't be for 30 years. It should be for 0 years. And the reason for that is I want ADUs to be built. If you're telling somebody that in order to build an ADU, you have to restrict it for 30 years to essentially cap the price of what you can receive in remuneration for rentals. We don't do that for anything else in our economy. Imagine telling a restaurant owner, you can open up a restaurant in Charleston, but you better not ever charge more than $10 for that hamburger. Guys, we're not building enough ADUs in this city. We're not building enough homes in this city. I asked the last time we had a report on our ADU ordinance, how many ADUs had been built since we passed this first version of these modifications to the process, and the answer was 0. It does nothing for affordability in Charleston if we make these restrictions so onerous and so poor from a business perspective and the ability to recoup your investment in a timely period, to amortize your investment. I mean, we have to build more to drive costs down. I know this is coming from a good intention. We want housing to be affordable. I want housing to be affordable, but this is an absolute wrong policy. It's a misguided approach. It's a well-meaning approach, but we just need to make it easier for people to build ADUs, period. The more ADUs that we get on the market, the lower the cost will be. It's just as simple as that. It's supply and demand. And I won't vote for an ADU ordinance that has a 30-year affordability requirement that's pegged to AMI. You got to go and record restrictive covenants. Nobody's going to do this. And it defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. Thanks.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Councilmember Appel. I just wanted to, well, first of all, if your philosophy rules the day, which I will agree with that, then we're not really, we're talking about changing the existing ADU ordinance, because right now it requires affordability and it doesn't give any dead date when that affordability period ends. So we're talking about a different kind of amendment to the existing ADU ordinance. And I do support your reasoning about this, Councilmember Appel. When we passed this ordinance 2 or 3 years ago, I think we had a very comprehensive discussion about it. And frankly, I thought that we were going to go in the direction that you're suggesting now, that we would err on the side of wanting to create more units downtown where people are leaving the peninsula. And I've always been concerned about homeowners that have the opportunity to build another unit that potentially could be the rental sources of income that a longstanding homeowner might need in order to stay in place on the peninsula. So I do think that we've, sort of put a stamp of approval on building types without being as thoughtful as we need to be. And as we go forward, we do have to incentivize private development to be able to create a wealth of affordability naturally, as opposed to subsidized. We can't subsidize our way into 16,000 affordable units to the income ranges that we want to host and foster and nurture in Charleston. But just saying no to this change to this ordinance, Councilmember Appel, would not achieve the goal that you're going for. We have to take away the affordability requirement that's currently on the books.
Exactly right.
So I think that was a part and parcel of the discussion that occurred, and that after it goes to Planning Commission, it'll come back to us for a recommendation. And I would also just add for the conversation that I think it's also a matter of marketing and people not even knowing that it's now legal to build an ADU on their property. Right now, if you built one for a family member, there's no affordability requirement whatsoever. You could build one for your mother-in-law, for your child, but I'll be honest with you, I doubt if many of our citizens even know they have the right to build an ADU as part of their property. So that might be part of it too.
Yeah,
Councilmember Gregory.
You know, all due respect to Councilman Appel, I disagree with suggestions. If we allowed market forces to do what you just alluded to, I don't think there would be any affordability at all. I think it's because of the requirements to increase affordable housing. I think, but for those, I don't think we'd have any at all. So I don't agree with you, and I'd like to talk a little more about it, because since you've been on council, you have been alluding to the need for changes to our zoning ordinance in order for us to be able to create more affordable housing. And I have yet to see any proposed zoning changes from you that would take us in that direction. I'm very, very uncomfortable when we advocate letting the market forces do it. It has been proven that it doesn't. What it does is it escalates cost. And as a result, folks who need it will not be able to afford it and would have to move even further out, even if their jobs are here. Just the cost of coming back and forth would be a substantial burden. So I don't, you and I will have to talk about it a little more, because I'm not saying I can't be convinced, but you've got to give me a little more information than just abandoning.
So how about this? This is going to come back to council. So why don't y'all get together and talk about it a little bit more before it comes back to council, and then we can continue a deeper dive on it. Councilmember Waring?
Yeah, we do need to speak, Mr. Mayor. And the reason I say that, Councilmember Appel has some very good ideas, but you can use that same argument and almost apply to almost every affordable piece, with the exception of, government tax credits. I would say that there's no land cost on an ADU because the land cost has already been borne. Person has already bought the house and that lot. So when they go to add a unit to the back, if they really cost it out, land cost is what on this peninsula, let's say 15–20% of a project. 20% of that cost to do that ADU is not borne by having to purchase the land. But I do think we have created, and City Hall is probably one of the best examples of it all. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I don't know if we have an employee in City Hall that lives on the peninsula. I don't know, maybe Rick Giroux, but
He lives West Ashley.
he lives west. There you go. That's the place to come. But my point is, there was a time when almost everybody that worked in City Hall actually lived on the peninsula. They could walk to work. We have done as a city, and I've been part of it, we have done a whale of a job incentivizing unaffordable housing. And I would use Morrison Drive as the best example. I mean, some people can get an extra floor by putting in a bike rack. Not lower incomes, by increasing alternative mobility. And this city has actually created incentives for that. So yeah, we have to create some sort of incentive. I don't know whether we can get the tax credits or not. We certainly ought to look at that. And you're right, we'll talk about it further, Mr. Mayor, and I won't speak any longer, but if you cost it out and you back out the land costs, that ADU could be affordable for lower incomes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. So all of your report, Councilmember Mitchell, was for information only. Anything else? Use your mic, please.
The only one was the one we sent to the planning.
Yes, sir.
But everything else was information and presentation, and we had a lot of discussion on each one of those items.
Great.
So we got a lot of information, but it'll be coming back.
Great. Thank you. So we'll move on to our Committee on Public Safety. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Clerk, members of council. The Committee on Public Safety met yesterday at 2 o'clock. Two items for our consideration is items A and B, approval of an MOU between the city and the Department of Justice regarding CPD's participation in the DEA task force. And the other was approval of MOU between the city and HOMBV Manager LLC regarding the bridge view. Both of those were presented and approved unanimously, and I so recommend. Mr. Mayor.
Second. Any discussion? I think they were part of our Ways and Means. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it.
The other item on our agenda, Mr. Mayor, was a report from Amy Barch. The formerly organization known as Turning Leaf, they have gone to a national model. They've opened up a project in Columbia, very similar to what we have here in Charleston. Her rate of recidivism is wonderful. She is well above the national average of these men who go through her program, which means they're not returning back to a life of crime. They're being gainfully employed. And she gave us the percentages throughout all of that. But one thing I just want to make note to the committee is one of the folks who has been working for the city for a long period of time has moved up to a role of a supervisor. So we depend upon these men who are recommended by Amy. They fill a lot of spots for us. And we just need to continue funding this program. It's now called Turning 990 as opposed to Turning Leaf. That's our report.
I guess that's a right angle turn. I got it. All right. Any other comments, questions for Councilmember Shade? Hearing none, we'll move to Committee on Public Works. Councilmember Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Committee on Public Works met yesterday at 4 o'clock. Items A1 and A2 passed unanimously, and I ask for its approval. I so move.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
The last two items you saw was a discussion on some stormwater maintenance streams in Ashley Harbor. I want to single out Mr. Fountain. Mr. Fountain did a great job pushing for a better process. It's not completed, but I think we definitely have been enlightened by some of the examples he brought up. Our legal team is definitely engaged on it now, and I certainly appreciate Ms. Copeland, and, our legal team working on that. The neighborhoods and the neighbors are very willing. So I think something good is going to come out of that. So we had a very good hearted discussion, and we had an even longer discussion on Phil and Bill. But good discussions had, no action taken. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's the extent of my report.
Great. Thank you. Next up is our Committee on Ways and Means.
Move for approval.
Got a motion for approval. Any discussions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next is bills up for second reading. We have 5 of
Mr. Mayor,
them.
can we take 1 through 4 and separate 5, please?
You know, I was going to recommend. that.
Second.
Move for approval 1 through 4.
1 through 4, we'll take together.
Second.
Any discussion on 1 through 4? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Now for third
So moved.
reading and ratification. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. So next up is the ordinance regarding Sidewalk Cafe. We did get a communication just today from our planning department. And I guess we'll maybe put it on the floor for discussion purposes.
Mr. Mayor, if I might make a motion, I'd like to move to have this deferred. based
Second.
On the fact that this was given to us, say, in a memo, and I'm happy to discuss that with my fellow council members, but I move to defer.
Again.
And frankly, I concur. Any other, we get, have any discussion? All in favor to defer, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
If I might, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
just
sir.
With Mr. Summerfield here, I'd love if we can get with you just to talk a couple of thoughts, and anyone else. I think Mr. Summerfield sort of put it all out there for us as to how this is going to affect currently and existing outdoor operations, and I've got some thoughts on it, so would love to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll just quickly note that after I got the memo this morning and I left the office a half hour early to come here, I went up King Street and tried to eyeball the addresses that were listed in the memo. One of the first ones actually has a kind of alcove, and I don't know what they do at night. Maybe they pull the tables out onto the sidewalk, but for the most part, they had a couple of tables that were really on their private property in the alcove and not so much on the sidewalk. And I know those sidewalks are very narrow on King Street. But I'd almost want to question like the actual inches of that we're proposing in the ordinance and how close a two-top table, can squeeze in there or not. I know there was an example on Upper King, and I noted it myself, and I called it into the planning department a couple of months ago, where it seemed like the table was really impeding people from being able to walk by because it was right near a light pole. But I came to find out that they were only authorized for a two-seater that turned, right up against the wall and had two seats. And in fact, they had a four-seater out, which takes up more space. So I do think we're going to have to drill down and make sure that we're being safe, but at the same time, trying to allow our restaurants to do what they can do. Anyway, those were my quick observations just coming here this evening. Any other discussion on that or comments? All right, hearing none, we go to bills up for first reading. We don't have any, but we have 3 items for executive session. So can I entertain a motion that we go into executive session?
So moved.
We got a motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor, we just need to state what those items are for the
Okay.
record.
So the purpose, we got 3 different ones. One is to discuss legal issues regarding Fire Station 11. Another is a potential acquisition of property on Concord Street. And lastly, receiving legal advice regarding Charleston School of Law, which I'll make publicly known that I recused myself from. So when we finish items 1 and 2 in executive session, I will excuse myself. So we had a motion and a second. All in favor of going in executive session, say aye. Any opposed, the ayes have it.